Thomas Reed's hands were raw from scrubbing the quantum drive's cooling vents, but the job wasn't finished. The celestial Voyager's engineering deck stretched before him like a maze of gleaming pipes and humming machinery, all of which needed maintenance. As a Level 3 maintenance technician, or glorified space janitor, as he often thought of himself, Thomas knew every inch of these systems, even if the passengers relaxing 20 decks above never spared a thought for the people who kept their artificial gravity steady and their air clean. The ship's automated cleaning system whirred beside him, its mechanical arms moving in precise patterns. Thomas checked his tablet, confirming the next section that needed attention. The Celestial Voyager was the most prestigious cruise liner in the Sol Centauri run, and command made sure every surface sparkled like new credits. "Read." The harsh voice of his supervisor, Jenkins, crackled through his earpiece. "We've got a pressure drop in Section 7. Get on it." "On my way," Thomas replied, gathering his tools. As he made his way through the cramped maintenance tunnels, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The ship's usual symphony of sounds, the hum of the engines, the whisper of recycled air, seemed different somehow. Muted. He was halfway to Section 7 when the lights flickered. Thomas froze. In his 15 years working spacecraft maintenance, he'd never seen the Voyager's primary systems hiccup. The backup generators were triple redundant, and the power grid was. The deck plating beneath his feet vibrated with an unfamiliar resonance. Thomas pressed his hand against the wall, feeling the strange frequency travel up his arm. His skin tingled, and for a moment, the world seemed to shift, like reality itself was being pulled slightly out of alignment. "Jenkins," he called into his calm static answered. The maintenance tunnel ahead of him rippled, the air shimmering like heat waves off hot pavement. Thomas backed away, his heart pounding. A figure stepped through the distortion, a woman, tall and lithe, wearing armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her skin had a faint silvery sheen, and her eyes glowed with an inner light that marked her as definitely not human. "Thomas Reed," she said, her voice carrying an odd harmonic quality. "The time of hiding is over." Thomas turned to run, but another ripple in reality deposited a second figure behind him, this one a hulking brute in black armor, bearing weapons that hummed with deadly energy. "Hegemony forces," the woman said sharply. "They've found you sooner than expected." She extended her hand. "Come with me if you want to live." "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, pressing himself against the wall. "What's going on?" "I am Kira, last of the Sentinels." "And you, Thomas Reed, are the heir to the Aldarian throne." Before Thomas could process this absurd statement, the armored figure behind him opened fire. Kira moved with impossible speed, throwing up a barrier of shimmering energy that absorbed the blast. She grabbed Thomas's arm, and the world twisted. They emerged in the ship's cargo hold, among towers of stacked containers. Thomas stumbled, his stomach lurching from the instantaneous transportation. More armored figures were appearing throughout the hold, weapons raised. "Your father was Emperor Variant of the Aldarian Empire," Kira said, pulling him behind a container. "He was assassinated by the Hegemony 25 years ago. Your mother fled with you to Earth, hiding you among humans to protect you." "My mother was a schoolteacher from Minnesota," Thomas protested. "She died of cancer when I was 16. "A carefully crafted identity," Kira replied. "The woman who raised you gave her life to protect you, but she wasn't your birth mother." Energy blasts sizzled past their hiding spot. Kira produced a small device and pressed it into Thomas's hand. It was warm to the touch, and symbols appeared on its surface that he somehow understood despite never having seen them before. "The blood of the Aldarian kings flows in your veins," Kira said. "The power is within you, dormant but alive. The hegemony has hunted your bloodline for decades, destroying any who might challenge their rule. You are the last." Thomas stared at the device in his hand. The symbols seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. Something deep within him resonated with them, like a tuning fork struck at just the right frequency. I fix toilets and clean quantum drives, he said. I'm not a king. You are both, Kira replied. And right now, you need to survive. She grabbed his arm again. Focus on the device. Let it awaken what sleeps within you. Thomas clutched the warm metal as energy blasts intensified around them. The symbols blazed brighter, and that resonance within him grew stronger. Power surged through his body, ancient and familiar, like remembering something he'd never known he'd forgotten. The world shifted again as Kira transported them through space, emerging in a small docking bay. A sleek vessel waited there, its design unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. More armored figures burst into the bay behind them. Your father's people are still out there, Kira said, pushing him toward the ship. Scattered, hiding, but alive. They've waited 25 years for your return. Thomas looked back at the life he'd known, the maintenance tunnels, the endless tasks, the comfortable predictability of it all. Then he looked at the device in his hand, still pulsing with power that sang in his blood. The hegemony will tear this ship apart looking for you, Kira said. Every passenger and crew member is in danger while you remain. That decided him. Thomas Reed might not believe he was a king, but he wouldn't risk the lives of his crewmates. He ran up the vessel's boarding ramp, the strange symbols and controls inside somehow making perfect sense to him. As Kira sealed the ship and engaged its systems, Thomas felt the power within him surge stronger. The vessel responded to his presence, systems lighting up like they recognized him. Through the view screen, he watched armored troops pour into the docking bay. Hold on, Kira said, her hands dancing over the controls. The ship lifted off, its drives humming with power. Energy blasts splashed harmlessly off its hull as they shot out of the bay into open space. Thomas watched the celestial Voyager recede behind them, his old life vanishing into the star-speckled void. The device in his hand had grown cool, but the power it had awakened still thrummed through his veins. The alien ship emerged from faster-than-light travel in a system Thomas had never seen before. 3 suns burned in complex orbital patterns, casting multiple shadows across the vessel's bridge. A massive space station hung in the void before them, its architecture all sweeping curves and crystalline spires that seemed to defy physics. Welcome to Haven, Kira said, guiding their ship toward the station. One of the last refuges of your father's people. Thomas stood at the viewport, still trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. The power that had awakened within him hummed beneath his skin, making him acutely aware of the technology around him. The ship itself seemed to respond to his presence, systems adjusting automatically to his proximity. How many survived, he asked, watching the station grow larger. Fewer than we'd hoped, Kira replied. The hegemony was thorough in their purge. But those who escaped have been preparing for your return. The docking procedure was automated, the station's systems recognizing their vessel. As they disembarked, Thomas found himself in a vast chamber where architecture and nature seemed to blend seamlessly. Living plants grew along the walls, their bioluminescent flowers providing soft illumination. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy that resonated with the power inside him. A group waited for them at the bottom of the boarding ramp. At their head stood a woman with silver-streaked hair and bearing that spoke of both military discipline and royal grace. Her uniform, though immaculate, bore rank insignia Thomas didn't recognize. My prince, she said, bowing deeply. I am Admiral Vina. I served your father in the last war, and I've spent 25 years preparing for this day. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure I'm who you think I am. Yesterday I was fixing waste recyclers. You are exactly who we think you are, another voice said. An elderly man stepped forward, his robes shimmering with embedded technology. I am Mentor Rallin. I was your father's teacher, and now I will be yours. Over the next several hours, Thomas was led through the station, shown holograms and historical records that documented the fall of the Aldarian Empire. He saw images of his father, the resemblance undeniable, addressing vast crowds. He watched recordings of the hegemony's assault, the devastating weapons they'd unleashed, the millions who died. Your father knew they were coming, Rallon explained as they stood in a chamber filled with floating holographic displays. He prepared contingencies, scattered our people across the galaxy. But he also knew that someday, we would need a leader to unite us again. I don't know how to be a leader, Thomas said. I don't know how to fight a war. That's why we train, Kira said, stepping into the chamber. The power you felt on the ship, that was just the beginning. The Aldarian bloodline carries abilities that have been passed down for millennia. Training began immediately. Rallon taught him about his heritage, the history and customs of his people. The old mentor's methods were unconventional. Instead of lectures, he used devices that implanted knowledge directly into Thomas's mind, centuries of learning compressed into intense bursts that left him gasping. Kira's lessons were more physical. She taught him to harness the energy within him, to shape it, to use it as both weapon and shield. Hours turned into days as Thomas learned to manipulate the advanced technology that responded to his bloodline's unique genetic signature. Your ancestors built wonders, Kira explained during one session, as Thomas struggled to maintain a force field. They understood that technology and consciousness were not separate things, but different expressions of the same universal energy. The training was brutal. Every muscle ached, and his mind felt stretched to breaking. But with each passing day, Thomas felt the power growing stronger, more controlled. The simple maintenance technician was being reformed into something else, something that carried the weight of centuries. Admiral Vina brought reports of hegemony movements, their forces searching known space for any sign of him. The resistance she'd built was substantial but scattered, hiding among the countless worlds and stations of human space. We've maintained cells throughout the galaxy, she explained, showing him strategic displays. But we've never had the strength to challenge the hegemony directly. Until now. 2 weeks into his training, the first real test came. A hegemony patrol discovered one of their supply outposts. The distress call reached Haven just as Thomas was finishing a session with Rallon. We have to help them, Thomas said, watching the tactical display showing hegemony warships bearing down on the small outpost. You're not ready, Rallon cautioned. You're training. Those are my people, Thomas interrupted, and for the first time, he felt the truth of those words in his bones. I won't abandon them. The battle was chaos. Thomas joined Kira and a squad of resistance fighters, their ships emerging from FTL into a firefight. The hegemony vessels were massive, bristling with weapons that could reduce planets to ash. Thomas felt the power surge within him as he took control of his ship's systems. The vessel responded like an extension of his will, dancing through enemy fire. He coordinated with the other resistance ships, using his newfound abilities to link their systems, making them fight as one. For a moment, it seemed they might win. The hegemony ships were falling back, their formations broken. Then reinforcements arrived, a capital ship that dwarfed everything else in the battle. Its first shot shattered the outpost's defenses. Fall back. Admiral Vina's voice crackled over the comm, all ships, emergency retreat. They escaped, but the cost was devastating. The outpost was destroyed, hundreds of lives lost. Thomas stood in Haven's command center afterward, watching the casualty report scroll past. Now you understand, Kira said softly. This is what the hegemony does. They destroy anything that threatens their power. They're going to keep coming, Thomas said. They'll hunt us until there's nothing left. Yes, Admiral Vina agreed. Unless we stop them. Thomas looked at his reflection in a nearby display. He barely recognized himself anymore. The maintenance technician was still there, but now there was something else too, something older, something royal. Then we'll stop them, he said. Whatever it takes. Rallon smiled, a fierce pride in his eyes. Now you begin to sound like your father. Thomas turned back to the tactical display, watching the movement of hegemony forces across known space. They were coming for him, for his people, for everything the Aldarian Empire had once represented. But they would find more than they bargained for. The power hummed within him, stronger than ever. He wasn't just a maintenance technician anymore, and he wasn't just an heir to a fallen throne. He was both, and perhaps that was exactly what his people needed, someone who understood both the common people and the weight of a crown. "Show me everything," he said to Admiral Vina. "Every asset, every ally, every weakness in their defenses. It's time we stopped hiding." The ancient Aldarian training chamber hummed with energy as Thomas faced off against 3 combat drones. His movements were fluid now, nothing like the awkward maintenance technician he'd been 2 months ago. Power flowed through him as naturally as breathing, forming shields of pure energy to deflect the drone's attacks while he struck back with precise bursts of force. "Enough," Kira called from the observation platform. The drones powered down, and Thomas lowered his hands, barely winded. "You've progressed faster than anyone expected." "Not fast enough," Thomas replied, watching holographic readouts of his performance. "The hegemony's still out there, hunting our people." Since the disaster at the outpost, Thomas had thrown himself into his training with renewed determination. Every loss, every refugee ship that didn't make it to safety, drove him harder. The power that had once felt alien now responded to his slightest thought, and the ancient Aldarian technologies sang to his touch. Admiral Vina entered the chamber, her usual military precision tempered by evident excitement. "My prince, we found something. Something that could change everything." In the command center, a holographic map displayed a sector of space deep in what had once been Aldarian territory. A pulsing point of light marked a location that made Thomas's blood stir with recognition. "The signal began 3 days ago," Vina explained. "It bears all the hallmarks of ancient Aldarian technology, but it's like nothing we've seen before." "Because it's not meant to be seen by anyone but you," Rallan said, studying Thomas's reaction. "Your father spoke of contingencies, of weapons and technologies hidden away for when they would be needed most." "It's obviously a trap," Kira stated flatly. "The hegemony has had decades to study Aldarian tech. They could have fabricated this." "No," Thomas said, reaching out to touch the hologram. The power within him resonated with the signal's location. "This is real. This is part of my heritage, calling to me." The decision to investigate was controversial. Haven's council argued for caution, but Thomas knew they couldn't afford to wait. Every day brought reports of more hegemony crackdowns, more displaced refugees seeking sanctuary. They assembled a small fleet, 5 ships crewed by their best people. Thomas insisted on leading the mission himself, despite objections from both Rallan and the council. As they prepared to depart, a new arrival brought unexpected support. Captain Lyra Voss strode into Haven's docking bay with a confidence that turned heads. Her ship, the Star Witch, was a legend among free traders and smugglers. More importantly, she had intimate knowledge of the sector they needed to penetrate. "The hegemony's got patrols through there thick as space dust," she said during the mission briefing. "But I know ways around them. Assuming your fancy royal blood can handle a little creative navigation." Thomas studied her, sensing there was more to her offer than simple altruism. "Why help us?" "Let's just say I've got my own reasons to want the hegemony taken down a peg," she replied with a sharp smile. "Besides, how often do you get to help restore a fallen empire?" The journey was tense. They moved through contested space like ghosts, using Lyra's routes and Thomas's growing abilities to slip past hegemony detection. The signal grew stronger as they approached, and with it came fragments of memories that weren't his own, echoes of his father's legacy encoded in his very genes. They found the source in an artificial asteroid belt, carefully hidden among thousands of identical rocks. As they drew closer, the entire belt began to shift, pieces moving in impossible patterns until they revealed a massive structure that defied conventional physics. An Aldarian forge world, Rallan breathed, ancient texts and diagrams floating before him. Not just a weapons facility, this is where your ancestors created their greatest works. Ships, technologies, things that became legend even before the fall. Thomas felt the station's systems awakening to his presence, layers of security and dormant protocols responding to his bloodline. But as their ships moved into dock, Kira's voice cut through his wonder. Multiple contacts. Hegemony signatures, at least 20 ships. How did they find us? Vina demanded. The answer came in the form of a transmission that made Thomas's blood run cold. On their primary display appeared the face of Lyra Voss, but her confident smile now held something cruel. Apologies, Your Highness, she said. But the hegemony's bounty on you would set me up for 10 lifetimes. Nothing personal. Chaos erupted. The hegemony fleet emerged from hiding, their weapons already charging. Thomas reached out with his power, trying to accelerate the ancient station's awakening, but centuries of dormancy couldn't be overcome in moments. Multiple boarding craft incoming, Kira reported, her voice tight. They're going to try to take the station. Thomas made a split-second decision. Vina, get our people out of here. Kira, Rallin, with me. We need to reach the station's core before they do. The battle that followed was desperate. As their ships engaged the hegemony fleet, Thomas led a small team into the station's depths. The ancient facility was a maze of technology beyond anything he'd yet encountered, and every step required him to interface with systems that had slept for decades. They fought their way through waves of hegemony troops, Thomas's powers growing stronger as he connected more deeply with the station's systems. But the betrayal had cost them dearly. Lyra had known too much about their defenses, their capabilities. In a vast chamber at the station's heart, Thomas found what had been calling to him. A console of pure energy responded to his touch, and suddenly his mind was flooded with understanding. The station wasn't just a forge, it was a key to unlocking abilities within his bloodline that had been dormant for generations. This is what my father prepared, he said, as knowledge poured into him. Not just weapons, but a way to restore what was lost. A massive explosion rocked the station. Through security feeds, they watched hegemony forces advancing on multiple fronts. Their own fleet was scattered, taking heavy losses. We need to go, Kira insisted. We can't let them take you. Thomas looked at the console, at the power and knowledge it offered. With more time, he could unlock secrets that might turn the tide of the war. But that time would cost lives, lives of people who had trusted him, followed him. The choice was impossible, but he was learning that leadership often meant impossible choices. Rig the station to blow, he ordered. We can't let this fall into their hands. As they fought their way back to their ship, Thomas carried the station's knowledge within him, not all of it, but enough to point the way forward. The hegemony might have won this battle through betrayal, but they'd also revealed just how much they feared him, feared what he represented. They'll hunt us harder now, Rallin said as their ship fled the explosion that consumed the ancient forge. They know how close we came to accessing your full heritage. Thomas watched the station's destruction through their viewscreen, feeling the weight of both victory and defeat. Let them hunt us, he said. Because now I know what we're truly capable of. And next time, we won't be the ones running. The rebel fleet hung in the shadow of a dying star, their ships scattered across a debris field that had once been a mining colony. 3 months had passed since the betrayal at the Forge station, and those months had changed everything. Thomas stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Aldarian Dawn, watching holographic displays of hegemony fleet movements across known space. They're getting desperate, Admiral Vina said, manipulating the tactical overlay. Look at their patrol patterns, they're spreading themselves thin trying to find us. Thomas nodded, his eyes tracking the movement of enemy ships. The knowledge he'd gained from the Forge station had transformed their resistance from a scattered band of survivors into something the hegemony truly feared. His powers had grown exponentially, allowing him to link with and enhance the capabilities of their entire fleet. What's the status of the Nexus project? He asked. Rallan stepped forward, his robes now bearing the scorch marks of recent battles. The integration is proceeding faster than expected. Your father's technology, combined with your unique abilities, we're creating something unprecedented. The Nexus project was their answer to the hegemony's superior numbers, a way to link their ships and crews into a single, coordinated force multiplied by Thomas's powers. But it was more than just a tactical advantage. It was proof that the Aldarian way of merging consciousness and technology could survive. Kira entered the bridge, her armor showing signs of recent combat. The new recruits are ready for inspection. Word of your victories is spreading. More systems are beginning to question hegemony rule. Their recent string of successes had started small, hit-and-run attacks on supply lines, liberating prison camps, protecting refugee convoys. But with each victory, their strength grew. People who had lived in fear of the hegemony for generations were beginning to hope again. "Show me," Thomas said. In the main hangar bay, hundreds of new recruits stood at attention. They came from dozens of species and systems, united by their desire to see the hegemony's iron grip broken. Thomas walked among them, feeling their mix of awe and determination. He stopped before a group of maintenance technicians, recently defected from a hegemony shipyard. They reminded him of himself, not so long ago. "You don't need royal blood to make a difference," he told them. "I learned more about leadership fixing waste recyclers than I ever did from genetic memories. Every skill, every perspective matters in this fight." The words weren't just encouragement, they were strategy. Thomas had realized that his father's empire had fallen partly because it had become too removed from its people. He was determined not to repeat that mistake. Their next target was ambitious, a major hegemony communications hub in the Vega sector. But as they prepared for the assault, Thomas received news that changed everything. "We found her," Kira reported, bringing up a secure transmission. "Lyra Voss. She's trying to sell information about our operations to the highest bidder." The betrayal still stung, but Thomas had learned from it. "Where?" "The Star Maze, neutral territory, theoretically. But we have confirmation the hegemonies sent a major fleet to the area." Thomas studied the tactical displays, a plan forming. "They think it's another trap for us. Let's show them who's really being hunted." The Star Maze was a natural labyrinth of stellar phenomena, where radiation and gravitational anomalies made normal navigation impossible. But Thomas's enhanced abilities, combined with the Nexus project's coordination, gave them an advantage. Their fleet split into smaller groups, appearing to stumble blindly into the maze. The hegemony ships followed, eager to spring their trap. But Thomas could feel every ship, every crew member, all linked through the Nexus. They moved like a single organism, drawing the enemy deeper. In the maze's heart, they found Lyra's ship docked at a hidden trading post. The betrayer's confidence vanished when she saw Thomas step onto her bridge, his powers holding her ship's systems in lockdown. "Wait," she stammered, "I can explain." "I should thank you," Thomas interrupted. "Your betrayal taught me something valuable. The old empire fell because it trusted in power alone. The new one will be different." Around them, the battle was reaching its climax. The hegemony fleet, scattered and disoriented in the maze, found themselves caught in a web of perfectly coordinated attacks. Ships linked through the Nexus project moved with impossible precision, their crews acting as one. "Surrender," Thomas offered the hegemony commander through an open channel. "Your soldiers will be treated fairly. This doesn't have to end in more bloodshed." The response was predictable, a barrage of fire that splashed harmlessly off shields enhanced by Thomas's powers. The battle that followed wasn't just a victory, it was a demonstration. The hegemony's greatest fleet was dismantled with surgical precision, their survivors taken aboard rebel ships as prisoners. In the aftermath, Thomas stood in the Dawn's observation dome, watching their expanded fleet emerge from the Star Maze. Lyra sat in a detention cell, her information now serving their cause instead of the hegemony's. But she was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The hegemony will respond to this loss with everything they have, Vina warned. Good, Thomas replied. Because now we're ready for them. He could feel the Nexus project humming through the fleet, connecting thousands of minds and hearts to a common cause. The knowledge from the Forge Station had given them the tools, but it was the people, from former maintenance techs to seasoned warriors, who gave their rebellion its true strength. Send word to our allies, he ordered. The time for hiding is over. We've proven what we can do. Now we show the galaxy that the hegemony isn't invincible. As if in response, the dying star behind them flared, its light catching the hull of every ship in their fleet. Thomas smiled, remembering the day he'd first learned of his heritage. He wasn't just fighting to reclaim a throne now, he was fighting to build something new, something that combined the best of his father's legacy with the wisdom he'd gained from his life among the stars. The next phase of the war would test them all. But as Thomas looked at his people, not subjects, but partners in a dream of freedom, he knew they were ready. The hegemony had ruled through fear for too long. It was time to show the galaxy a different way. The hegemony capital world of Nova Prime filled the viewscreen of the Aldarian Dawn, a planet-wide metropolis of towering spires and artificial continents floating in carefully controlled orbits. 6 months of victories had led to this moment. The combined rebel fleet, now nearly 1,000 ships strong, hung in formation around their flagship. Thomas stood at the command center, feeling the pulse of every connected vessel through the Nexus project. The knowledge from the Forge Station had let them perfect the technology, creating a symphony of minds and machines that had systematically dismantled the hegemony's control sector by sector. Their entire defense fleet is mobilizing, Admiral Vina reported. Over 3,000 ships, including everything they held in reserve. And their leadership? Thomas asked. Kira brought up detailed scans. The Hegemony Council is gathered in their central citadel. They're expecting us to be cautious, to lay siege. They don't understand what we've become. Thomas closed his eyes, reaching out through the Nexus to address every ship, every crew member in their fleet. For generations, the hegemony has ruled through fear and division. They've taught the galaxy that power comes only through domination. Today, we show them a different truth. The hegemony fleet approached in perfect formation, their numbers darkening the space between stars. Leading them was their flagship, the Inevitable, a vessel larger than some moons. Its weapon systems could devastate entire star systems. Multiple targeting locks, Rallin warned. They're preparing to fire. Thomas felt the power surge through him, stronger than ever. Begin the synchronization. Through the Nexus, every rebel ship became part of a greater whole. The knowledge from the Forge Station had shown them how to merge not just communications and tactics, but the very essence of their technology and consciousness. They moved as one vast organism, their shields overlapping in patterns that transformed energy rather than simply blocking it. The hegemony's first salvo, enough firepower to shatter a planet, washed over them like rain. In return, the rebel fleet split into precisely coordinated groups, each executing maneuvers that should have been impossible. Their formations are breaking, Vina reported with satisfaction. They can't adapt to our level of coordination. But Thomas knew the space battle was only one part of their plan. Kira, you have tactical command. It's time for the next phase. With Rallin and a select team, Thomas boarded a specially modified shuttle. As the fleet battle raged around them, they slipped through the chaos using technologies that hadn't been seen since the height of the Aldarian Empire. The hegemony citadel rose before them, its defenses formidable but predictable. They had expected an assault force, an army. Instead, they faced something their sensors could barely detect. The hegemony built their power on stolen Aldarian technology, Rallin said as they penetrated the outer defenses. But they never understood its true nature. Thomas led them through the citadel's halls, past automated defenses that fell silent at his touch. The power within him had grown beyond anything his ancestors had recorded, shaped by both his royal blood and his years of hands-on experience with machinery. They found the Hegemony Council in their sanctum, surrounded by guards and emergency protocols. The council members, beings from various species who had held absolute power for decades, stared at Thomas with a mixture of fear and hatred. "The last Eldarian," the council leader sneered. "Come to reclaim Daddy's throne?" "No," Thomas replied, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "I've come to end an era." The guards opened fire, but Thomas's powers had evolved beyond simple force fields. The energy of their weapons transformed, becoming part of the greater pattern he could now see in all technology. Through the Nexus, he could feel the space battle reaching its climax. The rebel fleet moved with transcendent coordination, not destroying the hegemony ships but systematically disabling them. Each victory added to their strength as more crews saw the truth. "Your empire is built on fear," Thomas told the council, deflecting another barrage. "But fear isn't power. True power comes from unity, from understanding the connections between all things." He reached out, not with weapons but with the same energy that linked their fleet. The Citadel's systems responded, decades of hegemony control melting away before older, deeper protocols. "Impossible," the council leader whispered as holographic displays showed their forces surrendering across Nova Prime. "I learned something as a maintenance technician," Thomas said, letting his power flow through the Citadel's network. "Everything is connected. Every system, every person, every moment of history. The hegemony tried to rule by breaking those connections. The Eldarian Empire failed because it forgot them. Around them, the Citadel was transforming. Ancient systems awakened, revealing their true nature not as tools of control, but as instruments of harmony. Listen to me," Thomas broadcast his words across every channel, to every world. "I'm not here to replace one empire with another. The age of emperors and councils is over. I'm here to remind us of what we can be when we work as one." Through the Nexus, he shared his vision. Not just with his fleet, but with every connected system. He showed them the truth the Forge Station had revealed, that technology wasn't meant to divide and dominate, but to unite and elevate. The Hegemony Council watched in disbelief as their own systems responded to Thomas's presence, centuries of restrictions and controls dissolving. "What are you doing?" the council leader demanded. "Creating something new," Thomas replied. "A galaxy where power is shared, not hoarded. Where technology serves connection, not control." The Eldarian Empire understood this once, before it lost its way. The hegemony never understood it at all. Hours later, Thomas stood on the Citadel's observation deck, watching ships from across the galaxy arriving in orbit. The hegemony's fall had created a vacuum, but not one that would be filled by another empire. "The transition won't be easy," Vina said, joining him. "Some will resist change. That's why we don't force it," Thomas replied. "We show them a better way, just as my father's legacy showed me. Not through conquest, but through connection." Kira approached, her expression thoughtful. "And what about you? The people still want their prince." Thomas smiled, feeling the pulse of the Nexus, the countless minds and machines working in harmony. "They don't need a prince. They need someone who understands both the heights of power and the importance of maintaining the smallest systems. A bridge between what was and what can be." He turned to face his friends, his teachers, his allies. In their eyes, he saw not subjects awaiting orders, but partners in an unprecedented journey. "The throne my father left isn't a seat of power," he said. "It's a responsibility to maintain the connections that make us strong. Not from above, but from within." As if to emphasize his words, the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, their light reflecting off the vessels in orbit, hegemony ships and rebel ships, now part of the same grand pattern. Thomas Reed, once a simple maintenance technician, now something both more and less than an emperor, smiled at the sight. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time in generations, the galaxy looked to the future not with fear, but with hope. And in the harmony of 1 trillion connected souls, a new age dawned.